The Salafi movement or Salafist movement is an ultra-conservative reform movement within Sunni Islam that references the doctrine known as Salafism. The doctrine can be summed up as taking a fundamentalist approach to Islam, emulating the Prophet Muhammad and his earliest followers, al-Salaf al-Salih, the pious forefathers. They reject religious innovation, or bid'ah, and support the implementation of Sharia. The movement is often divided into three categories. The largest group are the purists, who avoid politics. The second largest group are the activists, who get involved in politics. The smallest group are the jihadists, who form a tiny minority. The Salafi movement is often described as being synonymous with Wahhabism, but Salafists consider the term Wahhabi derogatory. At other times, Salafism has been described as a hybrid of Wahhabism and other post-1960s movements. Salafism has become associated with literalist, strict and puritanical approaches to Islam particularly in the West, with the Salafi jihadists, who espouse offensive jihad as a legitimate expression of Islam against those they deem to be enemies of Islam. In legal matters, Salafis are divided between those who, in the name of independent legal judgment, reject strict adherence to the four schools of law and others who remain faithful to these. Etymology. Salafism takes its name from the Arabic term salaf, used to identify the earliest Muslims, who, its adherents believe, provide the epitome of Islamic practice. A hadith that quotes Muhammad saying, "The people of my own generation are the best, then those who come after them, and then those of the next generation," is seen as a call to Muslims to follow the example of those first three generations, known collectively as the Salaf or pious predecessors. They include Muhammad himself, the companions, the followers, and the followers of the followers. There are a number of records of the hadith that is narrated in the Sahih al-Bukhari of Abdallah ibn Umar. These have been revered in Islamic orthodoxy and by Sunni theologians since the 5th Muslim generation or earlier used their example to understand the texts and tenets of Islam, sometimes to differentiate the creed of the first Muslims from subsequent variations in creed and methodology, to oppose religious innovation and, conversely, to defend particular views and practices. Tenets. Salafis view the Salaf as an eternal model for all succeeding Muslim generations in the beliefs, exegesis, method of worship, mannerisms, morality, piety and conduct. The Islam they practiced is seen as pure, unadulterated and, therefore, the ultimate authority for the interpretation of the Sunnah. Salafis believe that the Quran, the Hadith and the consensus of approved scholarship along with the understanding of the Salaf as-Salih as being sufficient guidance for the Muslim, as the Salafi dawa is a methodology and not a madhab in fiqh as commonly misunderstood. Salafis can come from the Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali or the Hanafi schools of Sunni fiqh. Salafis condemn certain common practices as polytheism and tawassul of religious figures, such as venerating the graves of prophets and saints or using amulets to seek protection. Salafis place great emphasis on following acts in accordance with the known sunnah, not only in prayer but in every activity in daily life. For instance, many are careful to always use 3 fingers when eating, drink water in 3 pauses with the right hand while sitting. Views on Taqlid in legal matters. Salafis are divided between those who, in the name of independent legal judgment, reject strict adherence to the 4 schools of law and others who remain faithful to these. Salafi scholars from Saudi Arabia are generally bound by Hanbali fiqh and advocate following an imam rather than understanding scripture oneself. Other Salafi scholars, however, hold that taqlid is unlawful since from their perspective, following a madhab without searching for direct evidence leads Muslims astray. These scholars include Rashid Rida, Al-Kajnadi, Muhammad Abdu, Salim al-Hilali and Nazir al-Din al-Albani. At the very end of the spectrum, some Salafis hold Taqlid to be an act of polytheism. Opposition to the use of kalam. Modern-day proponents of the Athara school of theology largely come from the Salafi movement, who uphold the Athara works of Ibn Taymiyyah. For followers of the Salafi movement, the clear meaning of the Quran, and especially the prophetic traditions, has sole authority in matters of belief, and to engage in rational disputation, even if one arrives at the truth, is absolutely forbidden. Atharists engage in an amodal reading of the Quran, as opposed to one engaged in ta'wil. They do not attempt to conceptualize the meanings of the Quran rationally, and believe that the real modality should be consigned to God alone. In essence, the meaning has been accepted without asking how, or by la kaifa. Salafi scholars are in staunch opposition to the use of kalam, dialectics or speculative philosophy in theology. This is because it is seen as a heretical innovation in Islam which opposes the primordial aspiration to follow the original methodology of the Salaf as-Salihin with regards to Aqidah. Statements of the early Imams of the early Muslims are in corroboration with this, such as Abu Hanifa, who prohibited his students from engaging in kalam, stating that those who practice it are of the regressing ones. Malik ibn Anas referred to kalam in the Islamic religion as being detested, and that whoever seeks the religion through kalam will deviate. In addition, Shafi'i said that no knowledge of Islam can be gained from books of kalam, as kalam is not from knowledge, and that it is better for a man to spend his whole life doing whatever Allah has prohibited, besides shirk with Allah, rather than spending his whole life involved in kalam. Ahmad ibn Hanbal also spoke strongly against kalam, stating his view that no one looks into kalam unless there is corruption in his heart, and even went so far as to prohibit sitting with people practicing kalam even if they were defending the Sunnah, and instructing his students to warn against any person they saw practicing kalam. History. Landmarks claimed in the history of Salafi Dawah. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, known among Salafis as Imam Ahl al-Sunnah, and the three scholars commonly titled with the honorific Shaykh al-Islam, namely Taqi ad-Din ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. Early examples of usage of the term Salafi has been used to refer to the theological positions of particular scholars. Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Umar al-Darakatuni was described by al-Dahabi as never having entered into rhetoric or polemics. Instead he was Salafi. Also, al-Dahabi described Ibn al-Salah, a prominent 12th century hadith specialist, as firm in his religiosity, Salafi in his generality, and correct in his denomination. He refrained from falling into common pitfalls, believed in Allah and in what Allah has informed us of from his names and description. In another of his works, Tadkirat al-Hufaz, al-Dahabi said of Ibn al-Salah, I say, he was Salafi, of sound creed, abstaining from the interpretations of the scholars of rhetoric, believing in what has been textually established, without recourse to unjustified interpretation or elaboration. In his book, Tabsir al-Muntabi, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentioned the ascription al-Salafi and named Abd al-Rahman ibn Abdullah ibn Ahmad al-Sarkazi al-Salafi as an example of its usage. Ibn Hajar then said, and, likewise, the one ascribing to the Salaf. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani also used the term Salafi in describing Muhammad ibn al-Qasim ibn Sufyan al-Masri al-Maliki. He said that al-Maliki was Salafi al-Madhab, Salafi in his school of thought. In the book Al-Ansab by Abu Sa'd Abd al-Karim as-Samani, who died in the year 1166, under the entry for the ascription al-Salafi, he mentions an example or more of people who were so described in his time. In commenting upon as-Samani, Ibn al-Athir wrote, and a group were known by this epithet, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. Modern Salafists consider the 18th century scholar Muhammad bin Abd al-Wahhab and many of his students to have been Salafis. He started a revivalist movement in the remote, sparsely populated region of Najd, advocating a purging of practices such as the popular cult of saints, and shrine and tomb visitation, widespread among Muslims, but which he considered idolatry, impurities and innovations in Islam. His evangelizing in the Arabian Peninsula during the 18th century was a call to return to the practices of the early Muslims. His works, especially Kitab at-Tawhid, are still widely read by Salafis around the world today, and the majority of Salafi scholars still cite them frequently. Contemporary Salafism. Salafis are often known as Wahhabis, which is known as a belittling and derogatory term for them. Salafism is attractive to its adherents because it underscores Islam's universality. It insists on affirmation of the literal truth as understood by its apparent meaning of Quranic scripture and hadith. Trends within Salafism. Some who have observed trends in the Salafist movement have divided Salafis into three groups: purists, activists, and jihadish. Purists focus on education and missionary work to solidify the Tawhid. Activists focus on political reform and re-establishing a caliphate through the means of evolution, but not violence, and jihadists share similar political goals as the politicians, but engage in violent jihad. Purists are Salafists who focus on non-violent dawah, education, and purification of religious beliefs and practices. They dismiss politics as a diversion or even innovation that leads people away from Islam. They never oppose rulers. Madkhalism, as an example, is a strain of Salafists viewed as supportive of authoritarian regimes in the Middle East, taking its name from the controversial Saudi Arabian cleric Rabi al-Madkhali. The movement lost its support in Saudi Arabia proper when several members of the Permanent Committee denounced Madkhali personally. Influence of both the movement and its figureheads have waned so much within the Muslim world that analysts have declared it to be a largely European phenomenon. Activists are another strain of the global Salafi movement, but different from the Salafi jihadists in that they eschew violence, and different from Salafi purists in that they engage in modern political processes. Due to numerical superiority, the movement has been referred to as the mainstream of the Salafist movement at times. This trend, who some call politicos, see politics, is yet another field in which the Salafi creed has to be applied, in order to safeguard justice and guarantee that the political rule is based upon the Sharia. Al-Sawar al-Islamiyya, as example, has been involved in peaceful political reform. Safar al-Hawali and Salman al-Auda are representatives of this trend. Because of being active on social media, they have earned some support among more educated youth. It's very simple. We want Sharia. Sharia in economy, in politics, in judiciary, in our borders and our foreign relations. Muhammad Abdul Rahman, the son of Omar Abdul Rahman. Time Magazine, October 8, 2012. Salafi jihadists. Salafi jihadism was a term coined by Giles Keppel to describe those self-claiming Salafi groups who began developing an interest in jihad during the mid-1990s. Practitioners are often referred to as Salafi jihadish or Salafi jihadists. Journalist Bruce Livesey estimates Salafi jihadists constitute less than 0.5% of the world's 1.9 billion Muslims. Another definition of Salafi jihadism, offered by Muhammad M. Hafiz, is an extreme form of Sunni Islamism that rejects democracy and Shia rule. Hafiz distinguished him from apolitical and conservative Salafi scholars, but also from the Sawar movement associated with Salman al-Auda or Safar al-Hawali. An analysis of the Caucasus Emirate, a Salafi jihadist group, was made in 2014 by Darian Rhodes. It analyzes the group's strict observance of Tawhid and its rejection of shirk, Taqlid, Ijtihad and Bid'ah, while believing that jihad is the only way to advance the cause of Allah on the earth. Despite some similarities, The different contemporary self-proclaimed Salafist groups often strongly disapprove of one another and deny the other's Islamic character. Arguably the most ambitious and intolerant modern emanation is the self-styled Islamic State (ISIL), which declared a caliphate in conquered parts of civil war-torn Syria and Iraq, where it established a Sharia reign of terror, and vows to extend this over all Islam worldwide. Qutbism is a movement which has, at times, been described both as a strain of Salafism and an opposing movement, providing the foil to Madkalism in that the movement is typically found in radical opposition to the ruling regimes of the Middle East. Qutbism has, at times, been associated with the above-mentioned Salafist jihadist trend. Views on extremism. In recent years, Salafi methodology has come to be associated with the jihad of extremist groups that advocate the killing of innocent civilians. The Saudi scholar Muhammad ibn al-Uthaymin considered suicide bombing to be unlawful, and the scholar Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad wrote a treatise entitled, according to which intellect and religion is suicide bombings and destruction considered jihad. Muhammad Nasir-ud-Din al-Albani stated that, history repeats itself. Everybody claims that the Prophet is their role model. Our Prophet spent the first half of his message making dua, and he did not start it with jihad. Some Salafi scholars appear to support extremism and acts of violence. The Egyptian Salafi cleric Mahmoud Shaban appeared on a religious television channel calling for the deaths of main opposition figures Mohammed el-Baradei, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and former presidential candidate Hamdeen Sabahi. The popular Salafi preacher Zakir Naik, speaking of Osama bin Laden, said that he would not criticize bin Laden because he had not met him and did not know him personally. He added that, if bin Laden is fighting enemies of Islam, I am for him, and that, if he is terrorizing America, the biggest terrorist, I am with him. Every Muslim should be a terrorist. The thing is that if he is terrorizing the terrorist, he is following Islam. Whether he is or not, I don't know, but you as Muslims know that, without checking up. Laying allegations is also wrong. Salafism is sponsored globally by Saudi Arabia, and this ideology is used to justify the violent acts of jihadi Salafi groups that include Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, and the Al-Shabaab. In addition, Saudi Arabia prints textbooks for schools and universities to teach Salafism as well as recruit international students from Egypt, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Africa and the Balkans to help spreading Salafism in their local communities. Some other Islamic groups, particularly some Sufis, have also complained about extremism among some Salafi. It has been noted that the Western association of Salafi ideology with violence stems from writings through the prism of security studies that were published in the late 20th century and that continue to persist.